Video games, much like any new medium of entertainment, has generated some hysteria that has persisted over the last decade, and I wanted to take the time to evaluate the merits of these claims. Our goal in investigating these claims is to evaluate whether using video games as a medium for fellowship or as a tool for outreach is compromising the kingdom in any way. Outreach is important, but to walk in the Spirit is to deny the flesh, so we must deny sin wherever it may arise from. Clearly, we don't find video games sinful, or we wouldn't be doing these videos, but there are those that might disagree, and these videos are meant to provide solid secular evidence that defends video games from the more egregious accusations and controversies surrounding them. The topic we're discussing in this video is whether or not video games cause violence. Now, with as prevalent as video games have become, I think we would notice if games caused violence, which is why most gamers scoff at this notion and ignore the debate surrounding this, which is a surefire way to lose a debate and arguably why this myth has persisted for so long. Just a reminder that in the US, 50% of the population play video games. If 0.01% of gamers committed violent crimes, there wouldn't just be growth in violent crime, which hasn't happened, there would be multiplicatively more violent crime in the United States than we currently have. All that is to say, there's absolutely no correlation between video games and violence. Now that could be the end of the video there, but I do want to dig a little deeper and see what the experts have to say about it. Now there have been several neuroscientific studies that claim that video games cause violence. Now if there's no correlation between gaming and violence, you typically wouldn't even investigate, because if there isn't correlation, then there certainly isn't causation. So how did they even find causation? That is because they studied things like ERPs, event-related brain potential, to see if our brain produces a reaction to violence on screen. The issue with that is that we don't know enough about ERPs or interpreting them. The issue with this is that we don't know how to interpret ERPs, and we certainly didn't know how to back in 2011 when most of these articles were coming out. Yet they not only go so far as to interpret the ERPs, they also claim that this causes desensitization without doing a follow-up study to even confirm if your brain can become desensitized to ERPs, which is something we still don't understand very well to this day. This might sound like bad science, and that's because this is bad science. There are even studies that were conducted because they thought that research on video games might be biased. And the findings were that many research methods used were biased in methodology and interpretation to inflate the link between violence and video games. Now, this is less true for some of the softer sciences, but it is worth noting that the softer sciences have always struggled to maintain credibility because of their problems with repeatability. For those who haven't heard about the repeatability issue, there were a large number of articles found that when replicated yielded different results. The entire assumption behind science is that the world falls into predictable patterns, so this kind of blew up the academic community and led many to question the validity of many studies. I prefer to look at the studies individually and determine if there are issues in the methodology, and I encourage you to do the same before passing judgment. The main point there was that it's necessary to investigate for yourself if certain articles are up to scientific standard. I did look into many of the articles coming from psychology journals and sociology journals, and they fail to account for any potential extraneous variable. What this looks like is they often give a survey, which is unreliable anyway, and ask people, often children, if they play video games. They then ask questions to determine if the person is violent or feels violent. Now, the issue is that this would likely be determined, especially in children, by other factors like bad parenting. Furthermore, the idea of abstract violence that comes up in a lot of these articles is just nonsense. There's violence, which is a physical act, and abstract, something that isn't physical. I think the term they were looking for was maybe feelings of aggression, or some other standardized metric similar to what they use to diagnose autism. I find it hard to believe that an actual scientist with a PhD failed to use standardized metrics. Based on this information, we can only assume that they made up a term that isn't a standardized metric to inflate the results, which is in line with what the bias study found for many articles. So there are many faults with articles that suggest video games cause violence, and there's evidence of bias in the studies on the topic. And very recently, a myriad of experts have come out in defense of video games against this slander. But let's not go wild just yet. Video games have ratings. And I think that those ratings are loosely correct. I just want to clarify that just because video games do not cause violence, it doesn't mean that every video game is appropriate, especially for children. I think that everyone can use their own judgment here in deciding which content they and their children are allowed to see. Like it says in Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord."